We have the panelists, Lalit Banga, Sanjeev Dubey, and Marlene Bosch. So do I introduce or does anybody need introduction of Mr. G. Chandrasekhar? No hands up. So no introduction. You're well introduced. But again, to complete my task, my formality, Mr. Chandrasekhar is a well-known economist, columnist, commodity writer, and he passionately analyzes, you may have seen in Business Line, Hindu Group, many of his articles coming up on various analysis of the commodities, mostly on pulses, oil seeds, and he comments and really comments on the policies. Mr. Patwari, who was to join us, he is based out of Singapore, the managing director of Seasons Overseas Group, and he was to present the perspective of Myanmar. I think this was the panelists. Mr. Banga has already been sent his reports. Have you received? No. Okay. So you just explain what the Myanmar right now is. Sanjeev Dubey, he knows India and Australia in and out. I had been in one of his panels at GPC Rio. You will hear him to believe him. Mr. Vivek Agrawal, JVL Agro Commodities. He writes mostly for overseas media, and he's a good analyst of the commodities. So, how the pulse production is, what is the present market, and what shall be the future market. You have the people here to discuss, forecast, and they may be the palmist of Indian and global pulse industry. Marlene has been actively involved in the agriculture industry in Canada since 1983. She holds a master's degree in agriculture economics and traded and exported Canadian commodities, including pulses, internationally for 20 years, while working for Cargill Grain and leading Bardex Canada Limited in 2003. She now has co-founded Mercantile Consulting Venture with Anthony P. Temple, who she worked with at Cargill. So she now independently works out a body analyzing the pulses market movement. So I leave this panel to the chair. Thank you.
Such a delight, friends, to be here to celebrate this World Pulse Day, 10th of February. I recall I was in Myanmar last year at Yangon, celebrating this for the first time, and I'm here in Delhi this year. I don't know where I'll be next year. Anyway, that's another matter. I've been asked to chair a session, moderate a session on markets and policies. Okay? And I have a very distinguished panel. And I'm going to start with Marlene. Happily, the previous session extended by 15 minutes, for we will have so much less time. But I hope our panelists will deliver value. And let's start with Marlene's presentation. She'll talk about Canada, would you?
No,
or the global
talk
picture?
About the world.
Global, oh, excellent, wonderful. I think that will set the tone for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here on this International Pulse Day. So thank you for having me in India. It's certainly a great experience. So I want to bring some of the panels that we have heard back to the world, actually. We have seen a lot of opportunities and details and challenges on India, and I think some of that we can weave into the presentation that will incorporate some of the rest of the world as well. So we only have very little time, so I will try not to rush through the presentation, but there are two important points that I will touch on. It's the production and overview of the trade in the world as it has developed over the last while and how we see it developing over the next few years with its implication on countries like India, but also touch on the challenges that we have in the next few years coming forward to garner more steam on the increases in importance we have seen on pulses. So we'll start with these graphs here, and I'm an agricultural economist. I like looking at numbers because I think numbers help us make decisions and drive our ideas and our thrust forward into certain directions. So on the left-hand side, you see the pulse production over the last 12 years by country, so we can distinguish where the biggest improvements actually occurred. And on the right-hand side, you see the overall pulse production. And the numbers are big. We have seen over those 12 years an increase of 54% or 34 million tons worldwide. So it's actually a very, very successful history that we've had over the last while. And of course, some of that or most of that production increase occurred in countries that export. And those production increases were really driven by the perceived increase in demand. That what spurred our trade on and what spurred our producers on to grow more pulses. And we will go back to this slide, actually. A little bit closer to home, I made a graph showing global pulse balance sheets. And balance sheets show your supply and demand on one graph, and then the carryout for the year 2019 and 2020, which is the year we just started. And we forecast that production will go up, supply will go up somewhat, but also the trade will be up again. And inferred usage, the usage we see in the world is actually going up so that ending stocks could easily actually contract by another 1 million tons, which obviously is very, very important when we think about how we perceive trade and price developments. I think there are a lot of traders in the audience as well, and traders like looking at stock use ratios, which expresses tightness actually and combines demand and production numbers. And we can see that basically for the forecast year 2020, we see for pulses overall, again, a slight tightening. And the numbers in brackets are actually averages, so we are going beyond averages. And people who trade a lot, they will know that for major commodities, when we fall below a 10% stock use ratio, it's considered tight and not oversupplied. And that's actually the situation we have slowly gone back into after having some years with a somewhat richer supply level. I'm from North America, that's where I live, so I also wanted to show you some more detail on North American production and outlook. On the left-hand side, you see US production by crop and by year, and on the right-hand side is the Canadian one, which is a little bit bigger. The one thing that I wanted to point out on this graph is that we have had a lot of volatility in production. And that volatility is not only induced by weather, although we did have some weather in North America as well, but also by the perceived demand because we're exporting nations. And so when we see demand decrease, we immediately know that there's an increased risk, and that also has an effect on some of the production decisions. And we'll talk about that detail a bit more. This graph actually summarizes the previous one, and it shows you that North American pulse production has been rather flat after the peak that we saw in 2016 when we built a supply base, actually an ending stock base that took us 3 years to deplete actually in North America. But as you can see, we're off the peaks, and we see us falling slightly below the long-term trend line, which is the yellow line on there. So we will not be building stocks in all probability as we go into this year. And the reason why we are not forecasting increases in production in North America is really expressed here. We look at farm economics the same way that you look at farm economics on different continents. And what we do is we look at return per acre rankings when we make forecasts in production. And you can see here on the left-hand side, I circled some graphs that show return per acre for lentils and peas, which are the biggest pulse export crops we grow in Canada. And they're actually less advantageous and in some cases negative compared to the other crops that we grow, which include rapeseed and wheat and barley and some of the other crops. So on the left-hand side, it's actually return per acre over total costs, and on the right-hand side, just over variable costs. And the ag economists in the crowd will know why. Another reason why we don't see production increase, actually, which is important for this region, should you have any difficulties in production yourself, is the really big variability in demand over the last number of years. So on the top graph, you see demand by commodity, by country. And the yellow line is demand for peas, in this example, by China. And the blue line on top is demand for yellow peas or for peas by India. As Canadian exporters, we were very lucky because basically the downturn of pea demand from India was more than replaced by the upturn for pea demand in China. And that is the reason why the stocks have been drawn down in spite of India choosing to buy a lot less from us. The bottom graph shows you basically overall demand. It shows you the variability the farmers are seeing, but still an overall upturn trend in spite of India pulling back. This is the same picture for lentils. And again, lentils, as you know, are a big export item. And India is our single biggest customer for lentils. And that's the top line, which on the right-hand side has turned up a little bit again. Turkey is our second important buyer for lentils. And there has been a lot of variability as well for a different reason, because there we have had more competition from countries like Kazakhstan. Again, a lot of variability in demand, but also still upturning overall in spite of the volatility in India. I also wanted to touch on some of the other producing countries that compete with us in the world markets or are alternative suppliers to you here in India for some of the products that we grow. Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan was touched on earlier today, and you can see that pulse production there is also turning down for the last 3 years for very similar reasons. On the right-hand side, that is pulse or lentil production in Kazakhstan, which competes into Turkey with us. And that's why we were able to increase our exports into Turkey once again, because Kazakh production has been downturning. Why is that downturning? And it's exactly the same reasons that we are seeing. Profitability of peas, in this example in the Ukraine, is not as good as for some other crops. One of the reasons is if you look at major grain markets, when you can sell wheat, as you can do right now, for $210 FOB from Russia and from the Ukraine, that especially at current exchange rates gives very good returns for their farmers. And therefore it is unlikely that they would really turn up their pulse production this year again. I wanted to touch on Australia. And Australian pulse production has also been flat and downturning for different reasons, and I want to talk about those reasons a little bit. We have seen a lot of weather, so Australian production is down 19% from 2014, and it's down 63% from 2016. So as you can see and feel here in India, there's a lot less availability of chickpeas and induced by weather. So I go back to the demand graph. And we have talked about production so far and some of the tremendous capacity in the export countries, but we have also seen, as I said earlier, demand turn up, and I wanted to point out where the demand is turning up. And that is not only in Asia, so certainly Asia is a major, major driver. We're also seeing it in North America, and that has to do with some of the fractioning demand and some of the demand for pet food and so on. And we are seeing it in North America actually as well as Southeast Asia. If you had take a longer term look at demand, I also wanted to show this slide. And it shows population, the top 10 most populated countries in 1950, in 2020, and in 2100. And as you know, some of the rankings have changed very, very radically. So when we plan for demand and then we plan for market development, we actually look at those developments and try to be forward-looking. And we can see that the markets will be changing in not too long a future, and I will refer to the FAO study actually in a second. I'm born in the 1950s, and at that time, China was the largest country, followed by India, followed by the United States. And there were also some European countries in there, from Europe actually. And so it was a very familiar scene. Fast forward to 2020, we still have China at the top, followed closely by India, and then the United States. But we also have Southeast Asian countries in there, and we see also some African countries showing up. If you fast forward again, another generation, you will see a lot more African countries coming. We have Nigeria in third place. We have Tanzania. We have Egypt in there. And so the balance of buyers, especially for pulses, will change very, very profoundly. You will also notice that China is no longer the most populated country, but very quickly I think India will move into that space, so they will remain tremendously important to the markets, but there will also a lot of other buyers be buying for some of the product. I also wanted to touch on some of the alternate demand in North America, and we talked just about fractioning in the last session. And these are some schematics for two plants that are actually scheduled to come into operation in Manitoba and Canada, where I live, within this coming summer. It's the Roquette pea plant geared for peas, but they're also already thinking about protein extraction from fava beans, for example, and the Mary pea plant. And combined, they will probably fraction about 150,000 tons to start with, and very quickly another 125,000 tons coming up on the Roquette plant. Some of this demand, if the forecast on plant-based meat and so on come true, will continue to grow. And I also see a lot of opportunity in China, in India here for this. And you are very keen on protein, and China, for example, is very keen on starch. So there must be somebody with some vision that might want to try and harness some of those ideas. But these are all additions to the current demand that we have now that I think are actually within our grasp. And I also wanted to touch on the FAO study that was talked about earlier today. And as it so happened, I actually had looked at that study earlier, and I had looked at some of the demand forecast nearby. So in this already existing study for 2025, the FAO thinks, and I think there are some very legitimate numbers in there, that we will have an additional 21 million tons of demand for pulses coming on stream without getting very exotic on some of the uses. And then break them down by feed, food, and other use. And on the right-hand side, you see some of the countries that will become very important. So the graph shows actually the additional demand that's forecast to happen. And it's certainly in Asia, including India, but also sub-Saharan Africa, already within the next 5 years showing up, Latin America, North Africa, and the Middle East. So, that is actually a challenge for the production countries, so that we need to encourage pulse production and not discourage pulse production. India is importing about 2.5 million tons, as an example from the study, and they think that they can easily need another 5.1 million tons by 2025. That's only 4.5 years away. And we should ask the question, can India reliably stay ahead of the demand by relying on domestic production only? I wanted to touch on some of the weather problems we have seen in 2019, and that's only a very, very short, very small example. Production in virtually every continent was affected. Australia, we mentioned that earlier, East Africa, quality in India, and in Canada we also had harvest problems. And we have some politically induced stoppages as well. So this slide actually shows you by problem, by flood, drought, cyclones, temperature changes, and so on, where we did have problem. As I said, it touches virtually every country. What it means is that our supply security, production security is threatened, and that we should be safeguarding ourselves in terms of supply, rather than discouraging farmers as we have seen in the last couple of years. So consistency of supply is going to be a challenge when you watch weather developments combined with increased demand. And so I think if you want food price stability for consumers and good returns for farmers, I think we need to have a really big look at global needs and show some price stability, which means also political stability, to encourage that production that I think we will need in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlene. Please put your hands together for a very crisp, absolutely crisp presentation. Thank you very much. So friends, brace for a 7% decline in pulses output globally in 2020. Is that right? A 7% decline in global pulse production in 2020.
It was a 7% stock use ratio.
Okay, what was that? Oh, I didn't see the caption. Anyway, okay, thank you very much. 2025, yes, I think we are probably on track to achieve the numbers. 2,100, I have my doubts. I don't think agriculture will be, in 2,100, agriculture will be the way we do it today. It will be very different. But that's another conversation. We'll have it later. Thank you very much again for a very crisp presentation. I'm now going to invite our friend Sanjeev Dubey to talk about Australia, Australian market, and some outlook for 2020.
Well, good evening, everyone, and congratulations on World Pulse Day. Happy World Pulse Day to everyone around the world. Thank you very much, Marilyn, for putting across the global outlook, including, in fact, a few things of Australia, which I was to talk about, like the weather issues and the production you've touched upon. Well, thank you very much for that. So, in Australia, I think most of the traders would know that we've been going through drought-like conditions. In fact, drought conditions in eastern Australia has been very, very dry. It's been in areas, it's been the driest on record. So that has affected production of all grains, and pulse has been affected quite badly because most of the chickpeas in Australia are grown in New South Wales and Queensland. So the year gone by and the year before that, we've had such low production, or I should say such low yields, that even if the planting was okay in a normal year, we would have seen at least twice or thrice the production of in metric tons. But in a way, it has kind of held the markets up only because of the Indian conditions of the tariff policies and the bans. That has limited Australian chickpeas and lentils and other pulses to only get into markets like Bangladesh and Pakistan. So it's been very dry, but after about a year and a half, over the past 10 days, there's been signs of promise. And over the past 10 days, Eastern Australia has had some very good rains. It's a start, but it's a good start. And we're getting into the planting season. Australia normally plants its winter crops in May and June. So it's a good time to have rains because the moisture would be retained in the soil for a longer period of time because we're getting into winters, so it won't evaporate. So we are expecting and hoping for a good production in 2020, in this coming year. But the only thing is about the markets on the other side, which I'm sure that someone will touch upon India and the other markets. Well, I believe we are trying to bifurcate the panel into policies at a later time. So it's just the outlook. The outlook looks promising in Australia, and we'll discuss a little more on the other side of our discussions. But all I'd also like to mention is that the GPC, the Global Pulses Confederation Convention in 2021 is in Sydney, Australia. So we really look forward, and we are very excited on that. So we look forward to that and welcome you all to that convention. So I'll just close there, but we'll speak later on the policies and others. Thank you.
Very much. Sanjeev, thank you. I'll now invite Lalit Bangat to share his thoughts on the market outlook in the Black Sea region. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Good evening. What an auspicious and lucky day for me, being today with this glittery of stars with whom I have spent most of my life. I've been in pulses business for 22 years. So for me, World Pulses Day is rather more happier occasion than my own birthday, because I have spent a lesser number of years with my parents than the number of years I spent with you all guys. So for me, this is greater than a birthday. Thank you. I'm going to touch upon this Black Sea origin pulses region. Of late, Black Sea has really come up with a very important and significant origin in the pulses region. Historically, US, Canada, Australia, Myanmar, we have been listening to those countries. But of late, for last 3-4 years, they have really significantly increased their production from as low as 2012 to 14, about 2.5 million tons, to it has gone to about 3 million in 2016. 2015, 2016 was 4.2, and in 2017 it was close to 6 million tons. So you can see the way they have gone up in increasing the production. But unfortunately, they really could not place the majority of their produce to various markets because having a limitation on the market. Unlike Canada, who found China as a alternate to India, the Indian policies really have a significant impact on Black Sea region. Despite the fact that the cost of producing the pulses in Black Sea is much, much lower than these other countries, about close to $30 to $40 a ton, it is lower. So, despite that, in 2018, Ukraine, the profitability of peas in Ukraine was negative. So in Ukraine, the people were getting minus negative margin on peas rather than, reason was not finding a home, increase in the fuel prices, seed prices. So that was history in Ukraine. The total share of Black Sea in the world, it is 26% in 2018, which has fallen down to 22% in 2019. This is the pea production. So the top pea producing countries are Canada, then of course Australia, Black Sea, they are the major pea producing countries. And a lot of pulses goes into feed market, unlike in India, where the uses of yellow peas and other pulses are to human consumption. In Black Sea, you will see a lot of these production goes to feed market, and then they find a big home in EU as a major destination. And another reason for making loss in one of these years was that the prices of pulses, like especially the chickpeas, this yellow peas has gone down from $400 plus to about $280, which is doing now. So this is one challenge for the Black Sea origin countries. Mainly as Black Sea covers these five major countries. Kazakh is a newborn baby. They are exporting out to neighboring countries like Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and lentils especially. And peas they are exporting to UAE, Turkey, and other countries. Russia and these countries have a challenge on the quality, which is not really very consistent on the chickpeas, especially Kabuli chickpeas. Most of our Indian friends are aware that this year they bought Kabuli chickpeas of various qualities. I would say it is muddy, it is dirty, it is stained, and 5%, 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%. So all these sort of deficient or other different quality product was having home this year, but I have my doubts because next year whether the same scenario will continue. So these countries have to really improve their quality like their North American friends. I think we will take up later on the policy on the other side. Indian policies, of course, they have the bearing on this, but we'll take up on the second section. Thank you. Thank you, Dev. So on Myanmar, I'll just briefly touch upon. There's not much to talk about the numbers of the Myanmar, because Myanmar, we have seen the production and the exports are more or less similar over the years. So there's not much change, there's not much weather issues, there's not much natural calamities. You don't find much of the differences in their production, their exports. And the major products are the black martpe, tur hole, and green mung beans. All three are subject to the Indian government policies these days, the import of which is governed by Indian government policies. So Myanmar also have some sort of a setback on their exports to India. India was there, more than 3/4 of their produce was being imported by India. So, but currently, as we can see, this year, in 2020, the expected production is about close to 1.2 million, 1.12 million, which is majority is black martpe, and the harvesting time is just started. So These are the months of major quantity exports, so everybody is watching and just with a lot of anxiety that how the government is going to take a new policy measures starting from 1st April. Currently, only the black mart pay is under licensing regime. Now 400,000 tons of the black mart pay can be bought under licenses, and with the recent new addition of 250,000, I believe since the cargo is to arrive by 31st of March, so my personal feeling is that not more than 150,000 will be exported out of Myanmar to catch up this tight schedule. The other markets are Pakistan, Middle East, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the other markets other than India. On the green mung side, it is a varied whole year round. You see the green mung crop coming out. Unlike black mart pen turhole, which is January to March, green mung means different varieties. You have the 4 varieties, they come round the year. So there's a different type of green mung beans. I think on this, I'll sum up. I will get a question on the policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalit. Thank you for the presentation. Thanks. Friends, I'm now going to take about 5 or 6 minutes. Sanjeev, alert me at the end of the 6 minute or 7 minute. I'll share some numbers about India. Okay, all right. Very quickly, if you look at India's pulses production over the last probably 15 or 20 years, I think the growth is in phases. Until about 2009-10, you can see and we have 2 crops, the Kharif crop and the Rabi crop. It was about 4 million tons plus between 9 and 11 million tons. Our production got trapped in the 13-15 million ton range. Then came a decisive year, 2010-11, when our production took a quantum jump. Kharif became 6 million tons, Rabi was 11 to 12 million tons, and our production went to the next high level, 17 to 19 million tons. And then we have 2016-17, 2017-18, 2018-19, the next high level, 9 million tons of Kharif and 14 to 16 million tons of Rabi, and we've reached now 23 to 25 million tons of pulses production in the 2 seasons. Where is it from here? Where is it going? That's the big question. 2019-20, the production target is 26.3 million tons for the 2 seasons together. The Kharif target is 10.1 million tons, and the Rabi is 16.2 million tons. The actual production in Rabi season, according to the Government of India's estimate, is 8.2 million tons of primarily PGNP, black matpe, and moong. But this estimate was made on the 23rd of September 2019, and we've had extended rains the whole of October into early November, and I've traveled across 2 or 3 states, and there is absolutely concrete evidence that there is crop damage, particularly PGNP, and therefore, for my own sense, is the actual crop may not be 8.2 million tons, it could be less than 7.5 million tons. The new estimate for the Kharif crop should come out the last week of this month, and hopefully the Agriculture Ministry will take note of the damage that extended rains caused and come up with more realistic numbers. Next one. Rabi status, Rabi planting is over. The crop is developing. Harvest should start sometime in March. Again, the acreage for chickpea, as you know, is 10.7 million hectares versus 9.6 million hectares. A clear 1 million hectare increase or expansion in the area of chickpea crop. The production target for chickpea is 11.6 million tons, vis-a-vis the actual production last year of 10.1 million tons. For lentil, again, the acreage is 1.6 million hectares, virtually unchanged from last year's number. There is no output target given, but last year's lentil output was 1.6 million tons. Field pea, the numbers are all here. So the total acreage this year is, in the Rabi season, is 16.1 million hectares, up by close to 1 million hectares from last year. And the output target, as I said, is 16.2 million tons vis-a-vis 14.8, the actual number for last year. And therefore, expect a 1.4 million ton increase. Will that be realized? That's the big question. Can we go to the next one? Will that be realized? That's a big question. If you look at out of the last 7 years until 2019, 4 out of the last 7 years, India faced unseasonal rains and hailstorm during March and even early April. We don't know whether there is a weather risk which is looming. There is no doubt at all. But will that risk materialize or will it fade? We still don't know. We need to wait and watch. That's important. The fact that the Kharif output has declined, and if the Rabi output were to take a hit, God forbid, it would not, it should not, but if it were to take a hit because of unseasonal rains, then I think our supply situation will get far tighter. Look at the current market prices. I'm sorry, these are in Indian rupees per quintal or per 100 kilograms. Chana prices are still rather low, far below the minimum support price. And therefore, but yet farmers have gone for at least 1 million hectares extra to plant chana. The only crop which is doing well in terms of prices higher than minimum support price is moong, 7,050 versus the market price of 7,600 and odd. Even masoor lentil is not doing too badly really. Market prices are much closer to the minimum support price. Yellow pea, very surprisingly, prices have shot up because of quantitative restrictions on import plus tariff restrictions on import. In the last several years, we have seen yellow pea prices trail chickpea prices in India, but in the last year and a half, yellow pea prices are far ahead of chickpea prices. These are some NAFED stock numbers. 2.1 million tons is a stock that NAFED is holding, of which chana or chickpea itself is about 1.6 million tons. I think this is the overall market scenario as far as India is concerned. I think we should close this. You've got a fairly good view of Australian crop picture from Sanjeev. Lalit spoke about Black Sea region and of course Myanmar, and Marlene of course gave a wonderful well-rounded picture about the global pulses market outlook. We will now go on to the next part of this discussion, which is policies, right? I have a lot to speak, but I'm going to allow my panelists to say all that they want to say. May I first invite Sanjeev? You want to come and talk about your comments on policies? You want to sit there? Yeah, I'm okay.
Yes.
Sure.
I'd rather that someone from India spoke first, because there's a lot of comments that can be made on that, especially on policies.
Thank you, NAFED. एंड सिंह साहब बहुत अच्छा खाना खिलाया और इतना हैवी खाना था कि वो अभी तक असर किया हुआ है. तो एक हल्की सी खुमारी सी है पल्सेस की. सो आई quickly start with our policies. Right now, government of India, and what I'm seeing is very clear that they very close watch what we are going to import, how much quantity we are going to import, and how can we stop over importing because of flooding the market. They are very, very tight seeing the situation, and we see the quantity restriction of yellow peas and this black mape. They feel that the price will go up, so they immediately release the quota. But I think the sir said 31st March is very limited time, because till the license is not allotted. So I think they have to think about the extend the time, as well as my perception that government of India have to be little bit more flexible on import from worldwide. We don't have to restrict ourselves very much. That As sir said, that seasons and this calamity and all things suddenly change. Now we are doing very well, but you don't know any big rain, any drought, anything happen, and when you start going to buy, India have a huge demand. So my idea is that government of India have to make such policies that can adopt uh, sourcing from Canada, Australia, whatever country we require, not more restricted ourselves, as well as protect our farmers' hit and what you say that farmers' interest. Rest, I think they are doing good. They are very smart move. They are more understand than trader. Now the government of India is more like a businessman. They watch everything and they understand everything and they take very right step for protecting their farmers as well as their ground workers. So I am really happy and I really appreciate their policies as of now. Thank you.
Thank you. Lalit, any comments on the policy side, please?
On Black Sea and Myanmar origin, which I touched based, incidentally, the Indian policy have very significant bearing on these policies of these countries. So basically, they don't have their own policy of MSP or some aid or some farmers production or neither of these places have this policy. So of late, if you remember, at one point of time, Myanmar government and Indian government was also trying to cooperate by way of some sort of a JV and some sort of assured supplies, but it could not really work out because the government in Myanmar work in a different fashion, unlike Indian government, which these days are getting more and more professional touch to the whole policies. So I think definitely the restrictive policies in India, which is the biggest importer and consumer, are definitely hampering to these countries. So in a way, yes, as an Indian, certainly I feel quite pride in saying so that now even the first time we are having feeling that the Indian government also are equally concerned about their farmers' interest, like our Western friends, US, Canada, where they really protect the farmers' interest. So in last few years, first time I'm feeling that even Indian government also working for their farmers. So in a way, yes, it is good. As a trader working for a company who is trading big pulses to India, it certainly affect the trading volume as such. But never mind, that's pretty good move by Indian government. Thank you.
Thank you. You have some comments?
Yes, thanks Vivek for that, for endorsing the government's view and your view itself, which for Australia, we see Australia as a complementing factor or towards India. So we always see Australia as a partner to India. We produce pulses at a different time, totally different time of the year than what India produces, and we can support the production system. So policies are very important for us, and we endorse, and me as a trader, we promote free trade. So anything free is always good. Free trade. But yes, one has to respect the policies of any other nation.
Madeleine, any thoughts on?
Well, I can make some comments on policies. In Canada, we don't have support for pulse production. It's basically determined by the market price. And, that has merits and demerits. I understand the conundrum in India in that you want to support farmers. I come from a farm myself, and sometimes it's necessary to give some inducement for production. But you also have a very large consumer base, and therein lies the conundrum. I think probably the most efficient way to induce production is always on the yield side. And that's what we have learned. When we can build a production base on an extraordinary yield or on some attributes that are rather unique, that's when we start producing profitably. It also ties into the value chain that we talked about earlier. So it's really a level up help. So any help in terms of a production system, be it agronomic, and in terms of yield-bringing techniques, I think is really the very best support you can give farmers. And it's also somewhat market neutral, and coming from an exporting country, that's somewhat important to us. And as I said, when I look forward into the next few years, the expected demand for pulses is very, very good. So if India wants to be assured that everybody produces pulses, should there be a shortfall, it's actually more evenly balanced out if that production inducement is across all the producing countries. So it's just a little bit of food for thought, because as I said, pulses are not something that we have produced for a long, long time. It was through variety and yield developments that really Canada came into the place, and the very same thing can happen here as well.
Thank you. Before I bring this session to a conclusion, I want to share some thoughts. Those of you who read my columns in the Hindu Business Line possibly may be familiar with what I've been writing and speaking. I think when you see globally, the policy context is becoming increasingly complex. There is someone in the White House who says, I'll make America great again. And liberalization goes out of the window, and we have protectionism. But no one raises a finger. This is one. Policy context is becoming increasingly complex, primarily because every country, every government, every administration, even in the mighty United States, faces a dilemma. And what is that dilemma? The dilemma is how to judiciously balance the conflicting interests of protecting domestic socio-economic interests and meeting international obligations. Every country faces this dilemma. They need to look after domestic socio-economic and political interests. They also have to be WTO compliant, trade agreement compliant, international obligations. I think this is becoming a very tough call for many governments. And Indian government is no exception. It's a tough call. We've had, I know this trade from the early 80s when India started to import pulses in a very, very liberalized way. And we know how volumes have expanded from about 300,000 tons to 6.5 million tons over years. But there came a time in 2016-17 when we had a quantum jump in production. And obviously prices collapsed, fell far below the minimum support price. And huge inventory that was built up because of low priced import further depressed domestic prices. What could the government of India have done? There was no choice but to import quantitative restrictions. Therefore, we did face a situation where protecting domestic interests became paramount. International obligations became secondary. And that situation has continued over the last 2 years. And God has been kind. I think our production has been in the 23-25 million ton range, as I showed, in the last 2 years or 3 years. Yet, I am clear in my mind, Indian agriculture is fragile and vulnerable. India is probably just one bad monsoon away from a major farm disaster. And therefore, we need to remember this fragility of Indian agriculture. And then we need to design policies that will at once take note of the fragility and the vulnerability of Indian agriculture, and at the same time protect farmers' interests, at the same time don't compromise consumers' interests. It's like walking on a razor's edge. It's very tough, but I'm sure if policymakers are proactive, if policymakers are able to see the emerging scenario, it should not be difficult for them to take proactive steps, which is where commercial intelligence and research and market outlook on commodities becomes very, very critical. And I don't know if I should say openly. I'm sorry, I think within the government circles, I find the kind of commercial intelligence that is required and the kind of political will that's required to take quick, proactive decision is largely absent. And therefore, yes, here is a government which has to take a tough call. Probably the government will not keep the market open so long as our production continues to remain high at 23, 24, 25 million tons. But if there are going to be issues in terms of production, I think we'll probably have to open up the market. This is one side. Allow me just 2 more minutes. Let us look at the other side. The other side is consumption or demand. Serious protein deficiency across India, pervasive undernutrition. What have we done as a nation to improve pulses consumption? After all, they are the cheapest vegetable protein available. Milk, we are the largest producers of milk, but milk has the most expensive protein. Then come poultry meat, then comes egg. They are all expensive animal protein. Soybean, peanut, pulses. They're all the cheapest vegetable protein available. And what have we done to boost Indian demand? I think we have done nothing to boost Indian demand as far as pulses are concerned. What prevents the government of India from supplying pulses under the public distribution system? If that is done, pulse consumption will take a quantum jump. But we have left it to market forces. And that's not a good policy, really. In a country where you have pervasive undernutrition, you need to deliver. You deliver rice and wheat. What prevents the government from delivering 1 or 2 kilograms per family per month of pulses at a subsidized rate? If it involves a subsidy, so be it. I think, and therefore, we need to look at production side, the risks associated with production. We need to boost our domestic consumption. We need to have policies that boost our domestic consumption. If both these receive adequate attention, I'm sure trade will take care of itself. Thank you very much. Thanks. I think we'll bring this session to a close. Thank you very much. Good luck and God bless you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. The chair and the panelists, they brought out the global outlook and Indian outlook of pulses very well. But as the chair mentioned, fragility and vulnerability of Indian agriculture dictates policies. So be it on the farmer side, the fragility and vulnerability of farmers needs equal protection. And I say much more protection because trade would adjust, farmers would suffer. I again take you back to the convention from where we started this association. And when the talks on the numbers were going on, Sanjeev would remember, even Lalit would remember, that our numbers proved to be true down the line for 9 months. And so numbers henceforth would also be true, except black map, as you indicated, because there we have some stress, rest we are comfortable. And so I'm quite optimistic, even on the peas and pea front, India is going to have a good production. Even if we are deficit, we have certain carryovers. Even if required, after our entire crop comes, we take positions accordingly. So this is what we have on the market outlook. I request our director, Shri Ashok Thakurji, to please come on the dais to present the mementos to the panel, please.
Just to add, Sunilji, what you said,
yes.
Your capacity and your capability, I must say in numbers, you said 63 lakh tons of crops, product you have already procured.
Yeah.
You know, this is the 40%, more than 40% of the world trade of pulses.
I know.
Let me tell you that.
Yes.
So this is a commendable, really commendable.
Thank you. In the morning session, we missed Ashok Dalwai Sahab in the first session, and he was so passionate about attending this event that yesterday evening when he had gone out, he had promised to come back by today evening from Pune to be here for this session. As you know, Sir is heading the committee for doubling the farmers' income. He's the chairman of the committee, and he has made extensive research, and his papers are available on the website of Niti Aayog and DSC and FW in 14 volumes, and it must be a read for everybody. I'll give you a link if you would like to keep it on GPC. That would be a lovely academic document talking about Indian agriculture, the contours, the past, present, and even the future. Sir, kindly, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev and Sunil and all the board of directors. I'm sorry I missed this opportunity of being with you the whole day. I was in Pune, but I didn't want to miss this, and I'm happy that I heard to the very intensive discussions that happened on the policy matters, the global situation. You have had 4 sessions, so there has been so much, I'm sure, deliberated upon. I'm not too sure whether I'll be repeating what has been deliberated since the morning. What I would like to share about this is that India would continue as it does today to lead the pulse market in the world for a few reasons. The first is sheer population. And nobody is going to beat us at least till 2100, and certainly not till 2150 at least. The second one is, by absolute number, would be having the highest number of vegetarian population. Today we have 47% of our population which is vegetarian, and even the 53% who are categorized as non-vegetarians or meat eaters are occasional eaters. Given the cultural dominance in India, there are many days in a week when people don't eat meat. Even the hardcore meat eaters in India do not eat meat on certain days. So given that, the number of people who depend on vegetative-oriented proteins would continue to be very high in our country. And the third most important reason for all of us to concern ourselves with is that while being food surplus, India is nutrition deficient. The latest Global Hunger Index exemplifies that. Given these 3 parameters, the only way forward for us is to produce more and more of pulses. And the paradigm that I would like to lay before you is that this is a good challenge and a good opportunity. The reasons are, from the consumer's perspective, these are the most cost-effective proteins available vis-a-vis meat and fish. Second, we have large extent of arable land, and we have climatically a very advantage in terms of cropping intensity that can be promoted. Let's say geographically we are number 7th world over. In terms of arable land, we are number 2, beating Australia, Russia, and other large countries. And if you take the seasonality, then since we have both southwest monsoon and northeast monsoons, the minimum number of seasons that we can practice agriculture is 2. Unlike US, which is larger than us in terms of arable land, but in terms of cropping intensity, we can overtake them. The implication is that even with 141 million hectares of land, if we can bring in appropriate technology and production endowment, then we will be able to increase our cropping intensity from the current 146% to 200%. And Government of India's policies, with of course support from state governments, is all to move towards increasing cropping intensity. When we want to increase the cropping intensity, the obvious candidates are pulses and oil seeds. And both these are extremely critical for India. Pulses because of the reasons I told you, and oil seeds because India is hugely deficit. We're spending huge amount of money in importing edible oils every year. And in a way, both these crops are similar in their physiological characters, in their agronomic production environment. Both today are grown on marginal lands, submarginal lands, and both are amenable to huge increase in the productivity. Now, India's productivity in pulse is very low. We are at an average of 7.8 quintals per hectare. That means less than 1 ton per hectare, as against 2 tons in USA or even 1.55 tons in China. And the gap between the genetic potential and the field realized potential today can be easily bridged by improving the agronomic practices. So the way forward is not difficult. Like in the last 4 years, since we actually focused on improving the pulse production in our country, after hitting a low of 16.7 million tons in 2016, was obviously to improve productivity. The whole strategy that we prepared in our department and ministry was to focus on improving the productivity. We have seen marginal increase in productivity, and this came about only because the farmers were incentivized. We had a lesson to fall back upon. The Green Revolution of 1960s, which revolved around cereals, wheat and paddy in particular, the benefit came in addition to technology from the price support. And here, in 2016-17, there was a massive jump in the price support offered to the pulse farmers under the minimum support price policy. We also realized that notifying a minimum support price is only a necessary step but not a sufficient condition. The sufficiency came from procurement. The procurement had to be done only because the market structure in India is still not effective and not efficient. The focus, of course, today is to improve the marketing structure of agriculture, create competitiveness, so that increasingly we move away from procurement to free market environment. But that is a long run. Hence, we had to make the intervention through procurement. And procurement, which you saw the 2.1 million tons of buffer that NAFED maintains today, is only a manifestation of the increased magnitude of procurement that happens in India today. Till 2014-15, we were procuring around 2% of the pulses. The maximum that we reached was 4%. But then now we have reached a figure of 18 to 20% of the total production that happens in the country. This is what has actually incentivized the farmers because they are now more assured of the procurement. We are, however, aware that going forward we can't keep on increasing procurement. We therefore need to incentivize the farmers through better market situation. And we have taken several steps towards that. Technologically, we know there are a lot of problems vis-a-vis the pulses to increase the productivity. One is that they are extremely vulnerable to pests and diseases, both at production stage and at storage stage. In fact, nearly 2 million tons of pulses go waste only because of pests and diseases. Now researchers are expected to focus on developing this biotic resistance among the pulses and apart from the abiotic stresses that are also developing vis-a-vis the pulses. So if we can focus on that, we will be able to increase the genetic potential and also harvest the genetic potential already that is available before us. But that is one major concern that we all have to address. And the second one, of course, is the climate change situation. Since pulses and oilseeds are grown on marginal and submarginal situations, like only 13% of the total area under pulses in the country, both in monsoon, both these, the Kharif and the Rabi seasons, is under irrigated condition. That means all of it depends on the rain fed. Given the extreme frequencies that are increasing in India, world over, the pulse can have a stress. It's very interesting that pulse is a crop that is vulnerable to high quantity of water as well as low quantity of water. If there is an unseasonal rain that has happened in this season, then it becomes water vulnerable. And that's how a lot of crop that Mr. Chandrasekhar was talking about has actually suffered in the last season. And if we do not get water at a critical stage of the crop growth, then also there is a stress and the yield reduces. Since tropical countries like India are more vulnerable to climate change than the temperate climates, we have a problem, and therefore we need to breed new varieties. The third very easy thing that we can do, and we are doing now, is to ensure that the seed replacement rate and the varietal replacement rate actually happens the way we want it. Unfortunately, the seed replacement rate in pulses is still around 20%, whereas it should be 33 to 42%. If we can strengthen our seed chain, that means right from foundation seed to breeder seed to the certified seeds, and ensure that the farmers get quality seeds, the productivity improves, because seed is something that can bring about a change in yield by 25% without improvement in any other environment. So we would be now focusing on seeds. And along with this seed, we also need to take care of the breeding I was talking to you about. But more importantly is to how to increase the area under irrigated condition. Now, Indo-Gangetic plain of Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, which have got better access to irrigation, are today actually centered around wheat and paddy. The focus today is how to substitute paddy in the main season by pulses and oilseeds. The reason is continued growth of paddy year after year has actually extracted too much of water, turned the soils saline and alkaline. Large tracts in Indo-Gangetic plains have become saline and alkaline. Pulses are best suited to actually address this particular problem. They're short duration, and then once we have pulses instead of paddy, it also becomes easy for us to grow wheat in time. Today, the pollution problem that we see as a result of burning of the paddy straw is because the farmers don't have a good window to prepare their land for wheat that follows paddy. States like Haryana have already started experimenting with providing income loss compensation to the farmers if they substitute paddy. Ultimately, farmer, like any of us, is an economic animal, is a rational animal. He would look in terms of profits, and we want him to look in terms of profit. Since intercrop comparisons, paddy and pulses, or wheat and pulses, or any other crop via pulses, is always a disadvantage. It is not just because of the prices, it is mostly because of the output. The output is so low, as I told you, 7.8 tons, quintals per hectare, against 5.2 tons of paddy in Punjab. So 5.2 tons of paddy in Punjab, in Haryana somewhere around 4.8 tons, average of 2.8 tons in the country for paddy is so much more favorable than growing pulse, which is only 0.8 tons per hectare. Our whole focus therefore has to be only on improving the productivity. And given the land inelasticity, we are now looking at lands which can be brought under pulses. And luckily now with this spatial technology that is available, we have been able to identify 12 million hectares of land that remains fallow in central India and eastern India. Now the space technology is helping us to identify where does the land remain fallow after the harvesting of the first crop, normally paddy, and where is the moisture content, because we require the minimum moisture. So now by putting these two together, juxtaposing these two factors or parameters, we are now able to increase the area under pulses in the second season, in spring and summer. We have already gone up to 0.3 million hectares as an additional area under pulses in the last 3 years. The increase that we see in pulses from 16.7 to around 25 million tons is a result of area expansion and productivity improvements. So there is a lot of scope that we have in India, and we would be focusing on that. Today, as a part of the income strategy, our Prime Minister has given a call that now we need to look at the incomes of the farmers. India looked at food security. Now India is looking at nutrition security for the consumers and income security for the farmers. When we talk of sustainability, the first thing that comes to all our minds is ecological sustainability. Yes, we need sustainable technologies and farm management practices that will ensure that resources are utilized efficiently and the productivity is continuously increasing and it does not hit a plateau. The marginal rate of returns on an investment must continuously go up. Unfortunately, they have plateaued in certain areas. We therefore are now looking at other sustainability, that is income oriented sustainability. Unless the farmers are able to get profits from their practices, there is no question of sustainability. They would rather leave the land fallow and get out of agriculture. Just as in any other enterprise, like service sector or industry, where the entrepreneur is advised to close his business if he is meeting losses, the farmers today may start thinking in that line. We therefore would now like to focus on income, and the whole agriculture strategy is now being geared or reoriented towards that. The first intervention that we're all making is to reduce the cost of production. There's no question of producing at any cost. It does not make economic sense. There's no point in producing anyhow without reference to ecology. So these are the two guiding factors: producing in tune with ecology, producing at cost effectiveness, so that the farmers are able to realize the same output or increased output at lower cost. And it is in this context that we have a promotion of the soil health management based on evidence-based analysis. Now every farmer gets a soil health card which analyzes the soil, and he then knows what to add and what not to add. Particularly in case of pulses which are atmospheric nitrogen fixers, we know they don't need to add too much of a nitrogen. Even P and K, for example, have to be only supplementary. So that particular evidence-based information today is being given to the farmers, so that the NPK and also the secondary and micronutrients shall be used in a more wholesome manner. So this is the approach. So we are now developing, or we have developed an ecosystem approach where the production combined with post-production, which means harvesting practices, integrating the farm gate with the consumption center through a robust agricultural value system, which consists, of course, of the storage infrastructure, of the transport infrastructure, and primary processing and other secondary processing. All these things are now on the radar, and this particular union budget has committed itself to some of these gaps that were existing in our agriculture system. So we hope to improve the pulse production just like any other crop that we also would like to bring on in our focus. But I must congratulate, in the presence of all of you, the great work that NAFED has done. NAFED, I think, to share with particularly our external delegates here, NAFED was almost a dying organization 4 years back. In fact, in our ministry, we were almost thinking of closing it. But then in the interest of farmers, this government took the decision that we shall support NAFED to restructure itself, reorganize itself. And thanks to Mr. Sanjeev Chadda and his team of friends who have done a marvelous work, I think it would be appropriate for me from the government side to openly acknowledge what they have done. Reorganizing, reorienting a government organization is much more challenging than what is possible in the private sector. And they have done it. And as was brought out, they are handling 40% more of the cumulative trade that the private sector does globally, which is a tribute to India, tribute to the public sector management in India, and of course the leadership that the chairman, the board of directors, then the managing director, the additional managing director, all of them have provided. So I think it is appropriate that all of us give a big applaud to all the members of NAFED. I would like to congratulate you and also thank the members and delegates of the Global Pulse Confederation who have found it appropriate to come to the Mecca of pulses. You know, it is the Mecca, and it will continue to be the Mecca of pulses. And we would look forward to partnership from the global management, from all countries, Canada, Australia, Myanmar, all countries who are pulse growers, because all of us are partners in ensuring the nutrition of our people across the globe. We can't have a world in 21st century where there are people going hungry or going hungry with hidden hunger. We now need to look at hidden hunger and see that everybody across the globe is going to live healthy. Then only I think all of us can have a healthy world, and that's what WTO was aiming at. That's what United Nations is supposed to be aiming at. So I think we're all members of those mighty organizations. So we commit ourselves to a healthy relationship. It can be a cooperative competition. It can be a healthy competition. We learn from one another in all aspects and take the whole thing forward. So thank you very much and for giving me this opportunity and sharing my ideas. And happy stay in India. Thank you.
We had a lovely talk, which really enriched us with so many academic informations about the pulse agriculture, sir. Now I request our director, Mr. Patange, to give a memento to sir.